My higher power, which I call God, who was just sitting down, just watching me, was like, you're ready. I got into a really, really bad accident that night, and I realized and totally accepted, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, and there's nothing I can do. And I realized how absolutely fucked I was. There's a difference between belief and connection, right? Not doing the steps, I didn't have a connection. How I experienced it is exactly how it's explained in the big book. I intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle me. But the most thing is inner peace and just finally loving and accepting myself.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Karen. Hi listeners, welcome to this new episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. Before we get to our guest, just a quick reminder. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, and I welcome all 12 steppers. Now, our guest Karen today got in touch with me to be on this pod, and if you'd like to do the same to work your 12th step, then reach out to me please on 12steps12questions@gmail.com. The email is also in the show notes. And with that said, let's get to our guest Karen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. I am a recovered alcoholic and addict. My name is Karen. My recovery date is, a sobriety date is the 23rd of June, 2020. And I am a member of AA and CA.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Karen, let's get to it. Our first question, the first question I ask every guest I have on this pod is whether you had any adverse childhood experiences.
And I was thinking about this question a lot, and I know for me, I was a very sexual child from a very young age. I don't know where that came from. And as a result, I started having sex very young. And I grew up on a very, very, very small island. And as a result, I had a bad reputation. So it got to the point where, yes, I was doing a lot of crazy stuff when it came to sex for such a young age, but it got to a point where anybody could just make up any rumor about me and people would believe it, right? And that resulted in losing friends, people's parents telling them not to hang out with that Karen girl, that kind of talk, and just kind of feeling like something was wrong with me. But then it's so funny because it's just like with the drinking and the using, I was doing the same thing, expecting different results, right? So I would, get with somebody and then, they would just be using me and then I would isolate and whatnot and be so hurt and then turn to somebody else to feel better. So it was just this cycle that just kept happening. And, in the era that I grew up in, it was in the 90s, living on a small island. And it was a very religious island as well. In terms of in my family, I have two sisters. I'm the baby. And, but I grew up mostly with one who's 4 years older than me. And, she was the type of child who excelled in everything, right? Like everything. And it's not like I did bad for myself. I did well in school. I had hobbies and whatnot, but I was constantly compared to her, to the point where it was like anything I did was not good enough. So I always felt no matter what I did, it wasn't good enough, And, now throughout the years, I've had conversations with the same sister and the pressure she had, I came to appreciate, like,
of course,
I didn't have that pressure, she just felt like she couldn't mess up, and I really feel a lot of empathy for that.
Yeah.
So it was basically just feeling, making bad decisions and then just feeling just isolated and just like I wasn't good enough and I didn't belong.
Yeah. Now, it sounds really, it sounds challenging in parts, and it sounds like those challenges perhaps also interacted with each other, I suppose, right? Without perhaps divulging too much of where you are and where you grew up, but when you say a small island, how small are we talking inhabitants wise?
It's like 100 and something square miles.
Right. Okay. So it's tiny, really.
Tiny. Yeah. Very,
right,
very tiny.
Okay.
So everybody knows everybody. You know what I mean? And that's, so you can't get away. You can't hide.
No. And when you say quite religious, so that means there was a lot of church going on Sundays, and if you didn't go to
it was like Anglican and Catholic were the two main religions there. And I also went to a Catholic high school as well. And it's just, back in the 90s and, just that kind of, just very religious.
Yeah. No, I understand. It's interesting because in part it sounds idyllic, of course, and on the other hand, if you have challenges like growing up next to a prodigy and you constantly get compared to them, being continuously in somebody else's shadow.
What I can remember, because when I really started noticing it was when maybe I was maybe about 10, 11. But I realize now, dealing with my father and understanding how he grew up, that was his way of encouraging.
Yeah.
Whereas to a small child, it was just like, all I'm hearing is you're not good enough, right?
Yeah.
And then that comparisons didn't start happening since I was 10 and 11.
Okay. Was this also the time that you started acting out?
You mean sexually? No, that started before then. It started, right. My earliest memory was when I was 6. I was actually born in South America. And I remember I have a clear view. I don't want to paint the actual picture, but I remember the clear view of me and a friend, engaging in some, it was just kissing, but for 6 years old, it was not, and, so it started way before that. Yeah.
Good. So it is really, really interesting. And it, of course, we'd start talking about these sort of behaviors usually a little bit later, and also perhaps within the context of different fellowships, right? Our question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked, what did the fun times look like? Now, not everybody has fun times, right? That has to be sort of caveat right there. And we also have to say, of course, that depending on what behaviors and things, there might not have been a party, as it were, right? But often what comes before the fall, right, comes that we find something that makes us feel better in one way or another before it becomes detrimental. So how did that manifest?
Oh, well, I remember the first time that I drank, right? I was 17, which, in our world is kind of late, and,
in my world too.
and because I had left that small island, we moved to this totally different country. And then I went to this school. Then I had like this culture and climate shock. So I went back to that small island for summer, and I was feeling again very, very isolated and left out, and like I was falling behind, because by then everybody had kind of graduated secondary school, had started going out, had a life, and I just didn't feel that way. Anyway, the first time that I drank, I remember we went somewhere and we were drinking, and I had no idea about drinking, because I remember growing up, I was like, I will never drink, I will never smoke. So as a result, I don't know that you should take your time drinking, right? So I'm just like gulp, 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 gulp. And I remember I operated in a full blackout that night, right? Woke up, passed out next to the toilet, passed out in somebody's car. And I woke up the next day saying, when are we going to do that again? Right? I just remember it being fun. So I've had, it's funny because with my journey, there've been, and I know we're going to talk about rock bottom soon, but there have been times where it's been like so much fun. You're going out with friends, you're having a good time. Then some really bad stuff would happen. I would stop, and then it would happen again. So, in the beginning, it made me feel like I could just kind of fit in, right?
Yeah.
I could really fake it really well. And I remember I used to say, I hate when I meet somebody when I'm drinking or using, because if they make me sober, they're not going to like me. Right. And, so it was fun in the beginning. I had a lot of fun. You had these friends who you kind of feel like everybody else is lame and, all that stuff, because we're doing these things and we're having fun and we've unlocked.
We're just a lot cooler than others. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Isn't it interesting how this, and this is super common. You don't even have to be an addict or an alcoholic for this, but because you're using or drinking, or maybe even engaging in certain behaviors, that you feel better than others, right?
Yeah.
I find this really funny now, but of course, back in those days, I would think that, because I smoked a lot of weed and, I was able to quote unquote see and understand things that other people couldn't. I've had friends in recovery talk to me and say that, because they used a lot of acid, they felt that they were, I'm quoting them here, at the forefront of human thought. Oh, right. God. And all sorts of stuff. Shout out to Joe, my former sponsor, this thing is, it does that, doesn't it? In the beginning, it's just, we go from not wanting to fit or not being able to fit in and wanting to fit in and feeling left out and like pariahs and different and all sorts to being better than others or feeling better than others because we found this magical substance or behavior. I love this. I love this sort of, it's dynamic.
And I just remembered, Sylvia, I just want to go back a bit because going back to childhood, I remember though I was a bit of a bully as well. It's really, how is it described in the big book I'm paraphrasing here, but it's with egomaniac with low self-esteem, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that there's a lot of people that I did not treat well, but at the same time was just feeling very like worthless, myself.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier about, and I don't think it's that uncommon really with us, is you go through a good time, like a good party phase, everything's great, and you're having a good time, you're young, you're going out and all of that. And then you might have a couple of bad experiences, you get too drunk or, you get hurt, you injure yourself or somebody else gets injured and you stay off, fear sobers you for a bit, and then eventually, of course, after a few weeks or months or something, you go back to it because it's your way of dealing with life.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is.
How did it progress from there? I mean,
this is the thing, right?
You're still quite young at this point.
My progression was, because everybody always says, you have to hit your rock bottom. I reached a lot of rock bottoms, right? Because it was when I went to university, that's when the drinking and the using of drugs really amplified. It just went up and up and up. And
what kind of stuff did you use, if I may ask?
Drinking, of course.
Yeah.
I was doing weed, but and this is another thing that you just talked about, where when I would smoke weed, it would be like all the stuff that I hated about myself would just come to the surface, right? And I remember I used to have some Rasta friends who used to say like, well, that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to make you study life. I'm like, bullshit. I don't want to be studying life when you know what I mean? I want to have a good time. Yeah. Anyway, so weed, did cocaine as well, ecstasy a lot, because that's the time when it started coming out. And I did dabble in mushrooms, and that experience was the same thing. Nobody told me, just use a little bit. So I was like, gobble, 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 gobble.
Oh,
and
God.
had the worst. And I was also with people who didn't really give a shit. So I'm just, it's horrible. So yeah, that's most of the things. The main things was, at that time, was alcohol and ecstasy.
Sounds like the 90s, all right?
Yeah, right? A lot of raves. Yeah, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But you're still in your party phase here, right? You're at college. You are mostly having a good time still, is what I'm hearing. Or were the first consequences showing at this point?
Yeah, the consequences did show, because I actually did not finish university because, what's so funny? It's that same sister that I talked about. I went to visit her for Christmas. And the night I was leaving, she said she hugged me, and she, you back off after you hug, and she looked in my eyes and she could see my soul pleading for help, right? And she told my parents, she's like, y'all need to get her out of there. So I had to leave university my junior year. And that's what I'm saying. Like it happened, and I came to the island I now live on, and kind of lived life, was still drinking and what, it wasn't as bad as before. Then it ramped up again. Then there were more consequences. My marriage ended, crashing cars, the usual stuff, all of that.
Well, let's just slow it down here for a second. Also, perhaps to just sort of very quickly, just to stick to the questions, our question 3, is what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom. And you sort of alluded to it there for a moment, but I want to also very quickly get to it before we go there.
Sure.
Not everybody has a rock bottom. Not everybody has one rock bottom, right? It is a loosely defined, I think everybody has a bottom of sorts, right? Where you say, this is it. I don't want this no more. Yeah. Right. But, it doesn't always look the same for everybody. And not everybody crashes cars, for instance. Right. Yeah. So, and not everybody's marriage ends either. Yeah. So it's a hugely intensely personal thing. And not even everybody gets in to the rooms on the back of a rock bottom. Some people come in at just some other point. So how did it play out for you? And what was your experience?
You mean in terms of getting to the rooms or just?
Yeah, just in terms of the question is what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom. So in other words, how did it progress?
Oh, well, as I said, it was, they didn't finish university, did that geographic change, and kind of slowed down for a bit. I was able to stop and moderate. When I was pregnant with my child, I had no desire to do it. And then it turned into what I talked about with, crashing cars. I actually ended up in rehab for 6 months. It's so funny. I was supposed to be there for 3 months and, I'm like getting close to the 3-month mark. I'm like, yes. And they're like, no, you need to stay for 3 more months. And it's like, wow. So, that's that. And I had to go to another island for that. So it was just like separated from my child who was like 7 or 8 at that time. And then I was okay for a bit, and then it turned in. The consequences included me not eating. They're not eating. My house is just like a garbage. Not really feeding my child properly. Sitting. I remember this where I used to be so paranoid. You do the staring out of the windows for hours.
Yeah.
And I would be so paranoid. I would tell myself there are 2 men outside my house and I'm going to get them before they get me. So I would be sitting in the bushes at 2:00 in the morning with a rock in my hand, like I'm going to get them. And I'm just imagining my neighbors just being like, oh, geez, there she goes again. Anyway.
Yeah.
And, it involved, right. So it also involved, and this is a question I know you're going to ask. I'm not going to bring that up yet. And what brought me into the rooms was, there was a time that I was 3 years abstinent, Silvio, right? I used to say 3 years clean, but I wasn't really working a program, right?
Right. But you were not using drugs or drink.
No, that's why I just say abstinent. I mean, I was going to meetings, I was doing service, but I wasn't really doing the steps.
Okay.
The reason I bring that up is that during those 3 years, I met a lady who came down from the UK. And just stay with me here. I have a point.
Sure. Yeah.
And she said to me, not in these words, but basically alluded to, you will drink and use again. Right. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, clutch the pearls. Like, what do you mean? Like, I don't want to go back to that life, And that did happen. I did end up relapsing, and like I told myself it was only going to be for one night, and it's a year later and I'm still using and drinking. And the last time that I used, which was the 22nd of June, 2020, I really like to tell this story. So please let me tell it.
Yeah. Take your time.
What I used to do is, cause this was during like the kind of lockdowny kind of thing, and you kind of coming out of lockdown and stuff. And what I used to do was say, I'm going to do some errands, right? Mm-hmm. And I would get this the biggest bottle of vodka I could find, because I'm convinced it doesn't smell, which is absolute bullshit. Mm-hmm. And then I would buy some Coke as well, and just be drinking and using and driving all day. And I remember the last day, I was sitting in the car, Silvio. I was sitting in the car and I did not want to do it. I didn't want to do it that day. Like, I just was tired. And, but I had already called my dealer. There's no way I'm going to drive off. What are you talking about?
Of course.
And, so I get the drugs, and I'm drinking and I'm using and all of that. And by nighttime, I remember I was with a friend of mine, And like those uncles in the movie that when they talk, they're just like, another thing, like they're so drunk. That's how I was, right?
Yeah.
And I remember saying to my friend, if there's a scale, and I know your listeners aren't going to be able to see because it's not a video, but if on the left, I had my left hand up and I said, if on my left hand is where it says, I'm not ready to stop, and my right hand says, I'm ready to stop, I'm very close to touching my right hand, like I'm ready, right? And I really honestly believe my higher power, which I call God, who was just sitting down, just watching me this past year, just do this craziness, was like, you're ready. And I got into a really, really bad accident that night. It wasn't my fault, but it didn't help that I was drinking and using all day. And it wasn't my car I was driving either. And I ended up in the hospital. And when I was in the hospital, I was sitting there, bleeding all over the people's chairs. And remember that lady I told you about who said, I heard her and I realized how absolutely fucked I was, right? Like it all made sense because she tried to do the work with me and I just didn't understand what, it's like, you're a bit too much for me. I'm not that kind of addict. And that's that was, again, as you're saying, not everybody has a rock bottom. People come in, they just come in. For me, I had to have a lot of them, but this one was just the one that really just stuck. And I realized and totally accepted, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic. There's nothing I can do, you know?
Yeah. It's a very, very powerful step one experience, this sort of thing. I mean, literally comes with a bang in this case, right? Yeah. My own step one experience also involved hospital, and I can tell you there's no better place than accident and emergency for a proper step one to really realize how absolutely fucked you are. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Right? How hopeless you really are, to really get to the desperateness of your situation. So I can really empathize with that. It's a very powerful thing when it happens, and I suppose if you manage to get away unscathed, and other people too, then we have to also appreciate how lucky we are, of course.
Can I ask you how you ended up in the hospital?
Yeah, I overdosed. Some of the gear was laced, and I've been drinking, using, I don't know how much I took or how little or whatever, and I just collapsed. 8:30 on the Thursday morning, nothing rock and roll about it. Nothing at all. I just collapsed, and ambulance, my wife was there, thankfully. And I say thankfully because somebody was there to call the ambulance.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like, were you alone? What happened?
No.
Clearly
and so, and I'll I've made this pledge actually that I will actually take my own questions at some point or another. So stay tuned for that. But I will do that, absolutely. I always thought maybe no one, given that I bang on about myself in this podcast a little bit, because obviously I want my guests to be involved and not just tell their story to a wall. And I thought maybe people wouldn't be interested, but there have been a few people who said, I think you should take your own questions. So,
that will come. We only get snippets, right? So
yeah. So that will come. And back to you though. And of course, this is a major event. It's a life event when something like that happens. And back on that, really, question 4 is, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide? Now, you could have, in that situation, you could have lost your life, of course, in an accident. But generally, also before that, when you were at your worst, did you want to die?
Yeah, so let me explain. I have always been suicidal, even from a young age. My thinking was always, I feel so worthless. I feel like I have no contribution, that I should just kill myself. Or I had this thinking of, if something I try doesn't work out, if it doesn't work out, I'm just going to kill myself. I had my first attempt when I was 15, because again, remember I was in that loop of, and in the childhood, it was people setting me up to make me look bad, all that stuff. And I remember I had my first, and the rumor going around was, oh, she's in the hospital to have an abortion. That's how bad it was, right?
Right.
And so over the years, even before I started drinking and using, I did have attempts. During my drinking and using, absolutely. The worst one what happened was in 2012. Here's what I was doing. In the big book, it talks about we depend on humans, right? And I had this group of friends, and this guy I was seeing that I was just putting like all into, and depending on them, and especially him, to make me feel like I had worth. But they're human, right? So eventually they're going to let you down, right?
They'll fail you, of course.
And 2012, there was a lot of stuff going on, and I would, like, the world just had this dark filter on it. Every morning I woke up, Sylvia, I was like, why the fuck am I still alive? I used to be so upset with God. Like, why are you still having me here? Yeah. And I one morning I woke up and I said, today is the day. And that same sister, she was actually visiting me. I feel so much empathy for the people who experience this. But so I said, today is the day. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go take the last of my money out of my account, which it wasn't much. I was surprised I had any. I'm going to have a last breakfast. I got some alcohol. I got some Coke. Pulled the biggest knife out of my house. And I went to this isolated spot on the island. It was one of my favorite spots, which is quite popular now. But back then, a lot of people didn't go. And I was like, nobody's going to find me. So I was just sitting there, just slitting my wrist. But, I'm also really drunk and really high. So you're just kind of fumbling and just, and eventually I passed out. And then I woke up, and the only reason I left that area was because I ran out of alcohol and I needed to go and get some. So I went to get some, and I went to park in this other place thinking nobody will see me. I'm driving the reddest car ever, right? And trying to park it and hide it. Try again to I still have these marks on my wrists. And eventually my ex-husband found me, and I was thrown in the psychiatric hospital, and that's when I was sent to rehab. And after that, there were other attempts. When I came back from rehab, again, not working a program, I was going to meetings, but just kind of sitting in the back. And after the meetings, everybody be like, you all right? I'm like, yeah, I'm all right. And leave, And, eventually, of course, my mind tells me to buy a drink, and it's a small drink, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I start indulging in other things. And maybe about a year later, my ex-husband calls me and he says, I heard that you're drinking and using again. I was like, no, what? What are you talking about? Not me, never, And he said, okay, all right, we're going to go get you tested tomorrow. And I was like, absolutely. Hang up the phone like, shit, what am I going to do, So there's this really powerful disinfectant where I live called Jay's Fluid, which is used to disinfect pig stables and all of that. And I ended up drinking some of that, thinking if I drink this is going to, you know what I mean? But again, higher power was like, no, it's not your time. I just ended up throwing up. So there were a lot of attempts. There were a lot. I used to think about hanging myself a lot. There was even a time, Silvio, where I was like, maybe I should murder somebody and be sent to jail. Then I'll be able to stop. That's how insane those thoughts are, right? It made sense in my head. But of course, I was like, a little tiny bit of me was like, no. But, there was still a part of me that was just, how do I get out of this? So there were a lot of attempts in my life, but that started even before I actually picked up substances, right?
Right. Okay.
So just ramped up.
So regular listeners will know what comes now. We'll say this every single time that we discuss this topic in detail, like we just have. If you feel, dear listener, like the world would be better off without you, if you're having those thoughts that Karen just shared with us, let's do something. Speak up. Go and see someone. Speak to the people you love. Speak to someone. There is the National Suicide Prevention Helpline. The number is in the show notes. Just speak up. Speak to someone. It doesn't have to be like that. And we're coming now to the part of the podcast, of course, where we're talking about the solution rather than to the darkest places that our illness takes us. So our question 5, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms? If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Oh, Well, the first was that geographic change, right? Staying away from people, places, and things. When it was with drinking, it was like, well, rum is the thing that's really fucking me up. Let me just drink beer, or maybe I should just stop for a while. It's not, because we're talking about moderating as well, right? Not just stopping.
Sure, yeah.
I remember with Coke, it used to be like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hide my money in the furthest corner of my drawer so I don't get to it. You know what I mean? But of course, we know, after a while, it's like, well, I've run out. What can I do? Well, I'm just going to take a little bit here. It also involved, I remember one time I was trying to work with this girl. She wasn't really a life coach, but she was just trying to guide me a bit. Trying that as well. Rehab, of course, I tried that. But I think it's really important for me to say this, Silvio. I know you're talking about before you come to the rooms, but you see, I really realized how powerless I was during my struggles with recovery for 20 years. And what I mean by that is trying to do the program my way, right? So I would come in with this gift of desperation. And, I'm thinking I've put down the drink, I've put down the drugs. I don't want to go back to that life. At that time, I still remember what it was like, right? And I always get misunderstood when I say this, but I'm still going to say it. What I was doing was, I was doing meetings every day, which are very important. Yes, I was doing service. But the steps, maybe I'll do this, but just really taking my time. Yeah. Not understanding my disease, not understanding there's going to be a point where I don't remember what it was like.
Yeah.
Right? And that kept happening because every time I would relapse and stay out there and come back, what I would do is up the meetings and up the service, but still not paying attention to that. And I think it's really important to point that out because it is part of my journey. And that's one of the ways why I tried to stop, where I came in thinking that I still had all this power, right? I had this illusion of power where I was thinking that I could control it.
That you have choice left in this. That you have some agency left in this.
Yeah.
I don't think it's anything controversial in saying this. We all know that working the steps with a sponsor is really the heart of the program.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're just coming in to do some meetings and do some service, that's really, really very good. The change, the spiritual change that we require to restore us to sanity, as the steps themselves say, well, they occur when we're taken through the steps and then get reinforced when we take others through the steps. So I don't think that there's anything controversial in that at all.
Yeah, I didn't know that though. Maybe I was being told that, but I just didn't hear it. Right?
Yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah. Absolutely. I've been told a lot of things, when in different parts of my journey that clearly I wasn't ready to hear, because I would swear, that people didn't say this or that, and they probably did.
Yeah.
I just didn't hear it.
Yeah,
selective. Yeah. There must be a really fancy word for it. Selective intake or something. Where you just don't really hear this or that. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, when you did come in and perhaps during this time where you're working, let's call it half a program, if you don't mind me saying that.
No, it's fine.
Or even later on when you really seriously started interacting with the steps and going through the steps and working, doing that work. Our question 6 is, did you struggle with the word God?
No. I remember some years ago when I was in a different fellowship, somebody pointed out to me that when we would do the serenity prayer, and of course the first word is God, that I didn't used to say the word God, but I didn't realize I was doing that. But I didn't have a problem with the word God. I like to tell this story with, when you first start drinking and you're doing it with people, right?
Of course.
The more you do it, the less, you're like, I don't want to share shit, so it's just you.
Yeah, so the isolation carousel.
Right. During the times when I was doing it with friends, and I remember I always used to say, I really wish I was a more spiritual person, but I've tried things and I haven't, but I do believe God is going to speak to me one day and my life is going to change. And that happened maybe about 10 years ago when I had that feeling. I didn't, what I used to be afraid of, and I think sometimes I may still too, is when I talk to people about, the word God, that they may be thinking I'm thinking of, a Christian God that I grew up with.
Sure.
Right. And they're like, oh, you're a Christian, no, and again, to any of my listeners who, if that is your concept of a higher power, I mean, no offense. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am not the actual word. No, not so much, but I would say mostly, no, I didn't. No.
Of course, it's not just the word, and I know exactly where you're coming. Well, I think I know where you're coming from. In terms of that, because my struggle with it was partially founded in this sort of erroneous assumption that I would have to find not my own concept of God, but rather what I was taught as being God when I was a little kid. Yeah. And that was Christian, and it was Jesus, and all the other things. And that is wonderful for everybody who connects with that and finds God there. Amazing. I just needed a different bridge, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
To essentially the same place. But that was a great, it was an erroneous assumption. I got this wrong. I thought I needed to find essentially my mother's God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Rather than,
God,
yeah, exactly. And because my mother being the more religious person in the household and the one who would actually, communicate with me, I thought that that's what I needed to find. But I had rejected that, of course, as just part of wanting to be my own person. I didn't know this. This was not very much not aware, but as being my own person, I had rejected all of that. So I think there's a great potential for misunderstanding that there certainly was for me.
Yeah, I don't think I had. I think I understood from the beginning that I could have my own conception. But again, I always say there's a difference between belief and connection, right? So I came in with belief, but not doing the steps, I didn't have a connection, and we know where that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of connection, our question 7: how do you experience your higher power today?
Oh, wow. Well, I stay constantly connected, right? And my higher power, which I call God, is with me all day. I talk to him all day, right? And how I experience it is exactly how it's explained in the big book. I intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle me.
Yeah.
Right? The way that I respond to people, the way that I realize my behavior maybe is not right? And I had to do that just before I came on this podcast. I had to make amends to somebody. And it's that's the biggest thing, is just hearing these thoughts, hearing these intuitive thoughts that I know aren't coming from me. Right? I was kind of I went through a situation a month ago, and I was at work. Because where I basically work alone, so I have a lot of time for this to just go off. My mind, people, that's what
pointing
I'm
pointing at her head.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember I was just talking to God, struggling with this thing, and I heard his voice. I heard this voice say something in my head, and I know it was not for me. I know it, right? And that's how it happens. It's just the intuitive thoughts. They may not come right on the spot, but again, I really do take God with me everywhere I go. One of the things that one of the things that does not come naturally for me is gratitude. Right?
Right.
It's not a natural thing. Somebody said to me, when it comes to animals, I have it easily, like it comes, but with humans, I really struggle with it. And, one of the things that I do is certain times a day, my phone goes off to remind me to stop, to just say in my head, God, thank you for whatever. It could be anything. And please allow me the willingness to continue to do your will throughout the day. Right?
Yeah.
So, and that's really, really helped, because it just helps me to just stay connected to my higher power. So the way that I encounter my higher power is just those intuitive thoughts that lead me to to just direct me and tell me, this is the way you should respond. You didn't do too well here, all those different things, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got a real, we all do, hopefully, but you've got a real clear, gratitude practice, but also a practice that reminds you to engage from conscious contact with your higher power.
Yeah, I'm really not afraid, but what I don't want to do is to fall back into that illusion of power where I think, because I can easily tell myself, oh, you got this,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, sounds familiar.
And again, from looking at all the relapses I had, because there was a lot, struggling with recovery for 20 years, the differences happened in the 4 years. It's not anything that I've done, yes, I have to do the footwork on a daily basis, but the footwork that I do is to stay connected to a higher power, which helps me to go on, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important to me. Really, it is a very important relationship in my life.
Yeah. Thank you, Karen. Our question 8: which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
1, definitely. Looking at my history, I thought I understood it. This is the thing. When I do my shares, I always say, listen, y'all, step 1 talks about we admitted we were powerless and our life was unmanageable. I was admitting that for years, easily. Mm-hmm. But what changed for me was when admitting changed to accepting. That it then I, you know what I mean? Because I was admitting for many years, but it's step 1, because I did not really understand step 1, because step 1 is so thorough in terms of explaining, listen, you have an allergy, right? You have an obsession of the mind, an allergy of the body. Once you pick up one, the first drink or the first hit gets you drunk or high. I never understood it. But of course, we know it talks about once I put in 1, I want more. But then the more you read into the big book, and the thing with the big book is I would never tell anybody to go and read the big book by itself. It is too heavy. You need somebody to take you through.
Almost definitely.
The other parts where it talks about I cannot do this alone on self-knowledge, right? Because eventually I have that. My disease eventually is going to tell me you don't have a disease, right? That mental blank spot. It's going to tell me I don't have a disease. All of that, like I only understood the consequences really. Like I can't go back because of that. But then going further, it goes deeper in terms of this is what your alcoholism and addiction can do, right?
Yeah.
So I really struggled with that because I don't know if it's a matter of not really being. It really wasn't broken down well for me in terms of that part of it until I really came back into the rooms this last time, right?
Yeah. I think that distinction you just made between admitting in step 1 that you're powerless and accepting it, that can be really quite a crucial difference. It doesn't sound like much, does it? But really what it means is that it's one thing to admit it, I suppose, but then when you accept it, you also accept responsibility for it and that you have to do something about it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. Thank you. Our question 9: which character defects give you most trouble?
But this is something that's been happening as a child. False narratives in my head where it's something I have to be really conscious about, because the thing is, we can get high or drunk off of thoughts, right? And when I find myself engaging in false narratives in my head, like maybe how I want a situation to go, or maybe how I should respond to this person or whatnot, immediately, Silvio, I stop and I say, God, please take away these false narratives and direct my attention to what you would have me be. Because again, I know that the effect of them first of all, it's false narrative, so it's not true. So I'm being dishonest with myself. And second of all, has a tendency to, as I said, make you feel drunk or high. And I see that in quotation marks, right? I've heard some people talk about being judgmental. That is something too that I, again, have to hand over. And when people say I am working on this defect, I'm like, well, if I could work on my defects, I wouldn't need 12-step recovery, And It's really about handing over. So it's the false narratives, being judgmental. Something that I did struggle with, but I find it's getting better, is also seeking validation.
Right.
But I find myself now well, maybe I should say this or maybe I should do this. I'm finding myself more taking a minute to pause. So that's getting a bit better in terms of me handing over. But the biggest one is those false narratives, which I have to be very conscious about on a daily basis and hand over.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. It's really good insight there. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
Oh, inner peace. Because remember, from a very young age, I felt like not only was I fighting everybody through life, I felt like I was fighting myself. My thing used to be like, you have no idea what it is to be me. And I mean that internally, right? And you know what's so funny, Silvio? This is going to sound really vain, okay? But please, listeners, I have a point to this. My father passed away last year. And, you're going through his house, you're going through pictures and you're going through stuff. And I'm seeing pictures of when I was like 20s and stuff. And I'm looking at that person. And I was like, wow, I remember feeling like any situation I got in was just so nerve wracking. And I'm not saying like I had anxiety and I just was not settled in myself. So everything seemed like I had to, not a threat, but just kind of like, God, how am I going to respond? What am I going to say? Even the way that I looked physically, I used to feel like, I was an ugly person and I just, all of that. And I'm looking at these pictures and I'm seeing the person and I'm like, no, you weren't, And so, yeah, the biggest thing it has is inner peace. Now, again, if I get into a new situation, which I don't on a daily basis, yes, as a human, you're going to feel a little bit rattled, in terms of like, oh, okay, how do I deal with this and whatnot? Talk to God, you get that direction. But the most thing is inner peace and just a love, finally, because I'm 44 now, finally just loving and accepting myself. And when I say accepting myself, it's not only that, well, this is who I am, so fuck y'all, this is how I'm going to be. No, it's accepting myself that, I don't have to pretend something for somebody else anymore.
Yeah, something that you're not.
Huge deal. Huge.
Yeah. I mean, what you just said there, this is me, right? Everybody, just take it. That's a sort of alcoholic style, unrecovered kind of self-acceptance, of course, which it isn't. It really just says, I don't care.
Yeah.
You better accept that I don't care, of course, and it's a really great distinction that you made there. And, but not needing to pretend that you are someone that you're not is a great, great, great freedom.
Yeah, it really is. I really can't explain it. I think unless you've experienced it, it's so freeing. It really is freeing, Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
To somebody if wondering if they were an addict, I think I would share with them my story and see if they see any similarities, and encourage them to come to the rooms. Anybody who's new to the rooms, of course, would say, welcome. We're really glad that you're here. You don't have to classify yourself as anything right now. Just listen to see, go to different meetings, but be very careful what meetings you're going to. And this is another thing I get people make controversy about, but make sure it's solution-based meetings you're going to and not shoelace meetings where somebody's talking about their shoelace that broke for half an hour and the newcomer's like, do I stay clean, right?
Not heard this shoelace thing before, and I've got a bit of a shoe fetish. Maybe it's a different kind of meeting I should engage in, but right, no, I hear that. I understand.
So I would say to them, go to different meetings, solution-based meetings, see if there's anything that clicks with you. Try not to go in there already like, this isn't going to work for me. And I would also say, you are going to hear people talking about God, and just explain to them, it's not a religious program, it's a spiritual program, but you don't have to worry about that right now. Right now, what we're doing is seeing if you identify with the behaviors and the thinking and the actions that people are talking about. And then we can go from there, right?
Yeah. Wonderful. Question
Actually,
12.
can I just say something?
Of course you can.
I made that mistake with, and I'm not going to say who, but someone, their daughter was like, she was thinking about joining the rooms and, but this God thing. And I basically said, well, that's the backbone of it. So if she can't, you know what I mean? And the person who's not in the program said, there's no way that can be the way that you welcome people in. It should not be. And it was like a very humbling experience for me. I had to make amends, apologize to that person. And since then, I was like, that's not the way to go, No. So it was a very teaching moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Humility. It comes at you.
Yeah.
From all corners. Absolutely. Question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you at the pearly gates?
So I was thinking about this question, right? And I was like, I don't know what I wanted to say. And you know what popped into my head? This is how I picture it happening.
Okay, go on.
In Lord of the Rings,
Yeah, go on.
Just stay with me. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, in the scene where Frodo wakes up from after his crazy journey, and everybody's coming in one by one. Hey, Frodo, you're awake. Yeah. And then Sam walks in, who's gone on the journey with him, and there are no words spoken between them. They're just looking at each other. And it's this look of familiarity. It's this look of, we've gone through this thing. And then Sam smiles at Frodo, just basically, it's just a smile that just melts your heart. And they're just so happy to see you. And that's exactly how I picture it with my higher power. Like, it's no words spoken. He just sees me. I see him. And we're just staring at each other. And he just gives me this smile. And, we maybe embrace in a hug. That's how I picture it.
Right. Lovely.
Yeah.
The different kind of fellowship of the ring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fellowship nonetheless. Karen, I could stay and hang out with you a little bit more. And, I'd like to also quickly address the banging noises. You don't connect to a Caribbean island, where there is no music in the background.
That's so true. It's so true.
This is so brilliant that we you get, it's quite atmospheric and, and it works really, really well. So, but, for the listeners wondering maybe, what was going on, this is what's going on. That's what happens when you connect to a Caribbean island.
Neighbors.
No, it's brilliant.
It's not my neighbors. There's nothing I can do. I'm sorry.
No. It's brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant. Karen, it's been really great. Thank you so much for, your time and your generosity and your honesty, and sharing your story in all the painful detail, but also in all the wonderful detail of your recovery. Thank you for being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Silvio. Thank you so much.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-step recovery program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific. It's fully self-supporting and not for profit. And this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.